With all the attention of our relationship with Russia, and that is what we're getting in the news and the papers and stuff, I thought it would be kind of fun to start the service with a little Russian humor. How many of you remember a comedian by the name of Yakov Smirnoff? Yeah, you remember him. And when he first came, he was a big hit as he would talk to us about the differences between Russia and America. And believe me, I'm glad that we live in America. But one of the things that Smirnoff noticed is when the first time he went to the grocery store, he couldn't believe how many instant products we have at our fingertips. How many instant products. And for instance, he discovered that we had powdered milk. And he goes, you just add water to the powdered milk and you've got milk. Wow, what a country. And then he noticed as he went down the aisle, farther down, he said, I discovered that we have instant orange juice. It's powdered orange juice. And all you do is add a little bit of water and you've got orange juice. Wow, what a country. He gets on farther into the grocery store and he finds baby powder. And he thinks about it for a moment. And he says, wow, what a country. We do have so much that we can just add a little water and it's instant milk and instant orange juice. But I don't think we can have instant babies. But there are those who think that our Christian faith is much like that. We take just add a little bit of water, and suddenly they become a Christian. A little water that will keep them from any harm. A little water that is somehow will protect them from all ills and such. A little water that will, in a sense, make them a Christian. I find it very interesting that in this day and age, we struggle with our Christian faith, and greatly do, because there is so many with no depth and no assurity, no assurance that they have, no trust. Rethink Church, which is a product of the United Methodist Church, they're trying to get us to move forward in our understanding of where church is and where we should be. And one of the discoveries that they found is that 11% of teenagers who attend church, only 11% of them have a deep and abiding faith. Of the teenagers that attend worship, only 11% have a deep, abiding faith. And us adults aren't much better than that. What they discovered, and this was a survey that they sent to all United Methodists, and maybe you had a chance to fill it out, but what they found out was only 32% of those who attended worship regularly had that deep and abiding faith, a faith that would get them through the struggles and the challenges and the difficulties of life, a faith that was there in their times of even death. You know, I really am glad that I'm not raising a kid anymore. I'm glad especially I don't have any kids in high school anymore, because of the way the world is changing. To the point that it isn't even safe for them to be in school. And how things have changed since I was in school. When we first started having children, Janet and I were doing a parenting workshop with other parents, and we were talking about the difference between our generation and the kids that we raised up, which was basically Liz and Matt right there. Our kids are that. In fact, Tommy had his 31st birthday yesterday. And what I found in my research was the fact is the one thing that we worried about most in school, my generation, was getting caught chewing gum in class. That was the number one thing that we worried about. You know, if you got caught chewing gum in school, you got either sent to the principal's office, or if you were like one of my teachers, he made us put the gum on our forehead and wear it the rest of the day as a way of punishment. But think about the kids today. Just think about the world that they live in and how that has changed. They can't even go to school now without having drills with active shooters. They go to school not sure if they're going to be safe. They are unsure if they're not going to be approached about if they want to do drugs. Indeed, their world is changing so quickly and so challenging and so difficult. And so I believe that our role as a church is to help give them a deep and abiding faith that will help them in dealing with life's struggles and their challenges. To give them that deep abiding faith that gets them through to be able to help in making the challenging, difficult decisions that they are facing day in and day out. This morning, I'm going to read from the Gospel of Mark, and it's a story that I want you to know that you're going to be familiar with it, but I want you to hear it with a new set of ears and to listen differently to this. It is a story about Peter and Jesus, and it is a pinnacle moment in the Gospel of Mark. It's in the 8th chapter, and from this moment on, Jesus has his face looking towards Jerusalem, and he is himself knowing that he is being measured for a cross. It is the first time that he reveals to the disciples that he is going to be dying. And so, as he's telling them this, I want you to think about this for a moment. Put yourself in Peter's place. Put yourself in the fact is that you don't know that Jesus is really the Son of God. You don't know that he will be crucified. You don't know that he will rise on Easter. You see, this was said and done before Easter. This is the first time that it's been revealed to the disciples that the Son of Man would be going to Jerusalem to die. And so the challenge here is for us to look at this from the perspective of Peter. Peter is kind of the center of this story and is pulled out from the disciples in this story. So imagine yourself in Peter's sandals as you're hearing this for the first time, because what Peter sees in Jesus is much different than what we see him now after Easter, 2,000 years later. What Peter sees and hopes for is that he's following a great military general or leader, someone that is going to take and lead Israel to be able to finally conquer the Romans whom they've been living under their thumb for many generations. And the tension between the Romans and the Israelites had become more and more intense. Peter has looked at Jesus as that one who is going to lead them as a leader. To think about what Peter had seen. He'd seen the miracles that Jesus had performed. He'd seen his power in the changing of water to wine and feeding 5,000 with 5 fish or 5 loaves and 2 fish. He has seen him heal the blind as well as the lame. He's also seen the great attraction that Jesus has in drawing people together as people for thousands of people would be gathered to hear him. And Peter is looking at him as the one who's going to lead them to finally conquer the Romans. Imagine what it would be like for us to be sitting here if we had lost World War II. Imagine how life would be different if we had lost that war. Imagine we ourselves, like the Israelites, would be living probably under a godless ruled country, a country that would keep us under their thumb. It would be a whole lot different. So we would be in the same shoes as those sandals really, that Peter wore. They're tired of it, and they were hoping for one to lead them to a revolt. And Peter and the rest of the disciples saw in Jesus the one who was going to finally lead the way. To lead the way to freedom. And that Israel would finally be raised up to its glory. So I want you to listen to this scripture with different ears as I read to you as if this had been taken place before Easter. Then Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Jesus said this all quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Jesus called the crowd with the disciples and said to them, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake, for the sake of the gospel, will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. What Peter is seeing in Jesus is something totally different than what Jesus is telling us. And Jesus is quite plain in what he's telling Peter, but it's not plain enough for him. What Jesus has done is called his disciples together and said to them, this is my plan of action. This is what we're going to do. But Peter was hearing in it, we're going to go to Jerusalem, and we're not even going to get help from the scribes, nor the Pharisees, nor the religious temple, from the temple, that we will be doing it alone, and we will be by ourselves in this fight for Israel. And Peter begins to rebuke Jesus, and Jesus puts an end to it. Basically, I can imagine him say, don't say this in front of the rest of the troops, because what it's going to do is just kill their morale. They're not going to want to follow you into death, and especially if they know that you, our leader, is going to be put to death. You see, Peter was seeing the worldly king, that Jesus was what he thought was going to be the worldly king. He imagined himself, as we read into the 9th chapter of Mark, is that like the other disciples, they were fighting over, once Jesus had conquered Israel and he was sitting on Herod's throne, they were going to be fighting over who's going to be on his right hand and who's going to be on his left. Who will be the greatest of those disciples? They didn't even get it in this message. But the message is different. Suddenly the question is different. Remember when Peter was first called, Jesus said, drop your nets and come and follow me. And now he's saying, pick up your cross and follow me. That's a big task. It's almost scary in the sense of what that means, because we know full well, and they knew full well what they were talking about, because the Romans had perfected the ability to put people to death to such pain and anguish that they lingered for days upon a cross. Betty Getch was in our office this week, and as we were talking about seeing the cross in the sanctuary, one of the things that she remembers about seeing and talking about in the Holy Land was that the cross was not tall and high up in the sky, that the cross was merely tall enough so that their feet would be this far off of the ground, far enough that they had nothing to push up on, far enough that there was nothing that they could push up on, and they would slowly drown as the fluids began to fill their lungs, but small enough that people could come and spit in their face. People could yell and rebuke them. People could call them names and tease them, as they did tease Jesus. You raised Lazarus from the dead. Let's see you raise yourself. Take yourself down from the cross, as they teased and harassed Jesus as he was dying. There are many of us who would rather die than be an embarrassment. And what is even more embarrassing is that Jesus would have been there naked, not with a towel or anything around his waist, fully exposed, which would be the worst thing for a Jewish man, to be exposed to the world. Naked and alone, spit upon and rebuked. That's what it was to be on the cross. So this morning, when we look at Jesus' invitation, but more importantly, a challenge to all of us, not to just drop our nets this time, but we are to pick up our cross, and to follow Him. To follow Him. What does that mean? Well, in just a little over a week, there's a group of us who will be going over to the Holy Land, and one of my places that are important to me and a very special part of that trip is walking the Via Dolorosa, which is the way of sorrow. For over 1,000 years, it began this journey of the stages of the cross by crusaders and that who brought this back, and now you see them in Catholic churches, the 14 stations of the cross. You go to a Catholic church and you see those 14 stations that begin with him receiving the cross and then making his way, falling 3 times, when Simon of the Cyrene helps in picking it up and carrying it for him. And 4 of those stations end up in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It is a journey over cobblestone that is over 1,000 years old, through narrow streets that you can imagine what it would have been like to bear the cross. And some of those who pilgrimage to this, these are thousands of Christians who walk this way. Some of them can pick up a cross and carry it all the way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre just so they know what it is like to suffer and to hold on to feel what that must have been like for Jesus. For me, when I walk the Via Dolorosa, it's not just a way to be there as a tourist, although I'm keeping an eye on all of those who are traveling with us to make sure that they stay away from the pickpockets and as well as the merchants, because they're all trying to get your attention. But I carry my Bible and I read the Good Friday scriptures. There's about 10 chapels along the way that you can step in to get away from the crowd and the noise, to recall and to pray. So prayerfully and spiritually, I walk this journey, this pilgrimage to Golgotha, wondering what it would have been like 2,000 years ago to remember what Christ did for me. And my hope is that our study together through Lent is that my hope is that you understand what Christ did in dying for us and his suffering. And so my hope is that you get an understanding of the power of the cross and why it is such a powerful symbol for all of us. That even when we wear a cross, we are reminded of that great love. That God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. It was upon that cross that he suffered and died. So when Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me, he's talking about not picking up my cross in the sense of Jesus' cross. He's talking about your cross that you must bear. The sad thing is that that frequently what we say is it's my cross to bear. You know, Janet will tell you that I snore, and she will say, well, it's my cross to bear. We use it flippantly now, as if it's something really terrible. You know, Matt always says, you know, his car just doesn't start regularly, so he will say, oh, it's just my cross not to bear. But we use it flippantly, but it is a cross that reminds us of the suffering and the pain and what Christ endured for us. But it is also a reminder of the suffering and pain that people endure in this life. There is so much in this world that needs to be corrected. There is so much in this world that we need to change and work on and make a difference in this. So it is, in a sense, our cross to bear, to do what we can to bring light in the midst of darkness. It is about sharing our faith. I wish you had been with me and Loretta when she showed me her card. I'm going to pick on you, Loretta. because you would have thought that she won the publishing house sweepstakes. The smile that she had on her face, the joy that she expressed in what she had received from a child that she had helped. Loretta, you fill my bucket. Love, Lydia. It is that little things that we often do that make all the difference in the world. And when Jesus is saying we must bear the cross, it is the way that we live out our faith. It's more than just sprinkling our heads with water, but it is living our faith out in our daily action, whether it's reading to children or painting rocks to give to those who are dying in our church. It's about witnessing our faith. Like I said, I don't know that I would want to be raising high school students, because I really feel as though we have really let our children and youth down. I really feel terrible about it. On Wednesday, I went over to the funeral home and visited with the Huffman family. And in that, and being in that place of death and being with the family and trying to support them, it was reminded that life, oftentimes, it was a reminder of how death is so close and how it affects us so much. I came to Fusion, and there was one of the persons that demonstrates her faith every week, Jane Wyckoff, who in delivering roses, as we say, she's the most popular member of our church. But it's a little act of kindness that makes all the difference in the world. And then I went home, and I got to see the tail end of the gathering in Parkland, Florida. A week after those children were killed, 17, Nicholas Cruz went in and killed 17. And I feel as though we have let our children down, but how impressed I was in watching those high school kids stand up and want to be heard. During the service, one of the fathers, the father of Alex, who was one of the 17 that was killed, read a poem about how life is like a roller coaster. Honestly, I don't know how a father could stand up a week after his son had been killed to read this poem that had been an assignment that was just newly read. Life is like a roller coaster. It has some ups and downs. Sometimes you can take it slow or very fast. It may be hard to breathe at times, but you have to push yourself and keep going. Your bar is your safety. It's like your family and friends. You hold on tight and you don't let go. But sometimes you might throw your hands up, because your friends and family will always be with you, just like that bar keeping you safe at all times. It may be too much for you at times, the twists, the turns, the upside downs, but you get back. You keep chugging along. Eventually, it comes to a stop. And this is when the father had a hard time. But I don't know how he pushed through. It comes to a stop. You won't know when or how, but you will know that it'll be time to get off and start anew. Life is like a roller coaster. What has impressed me the most about these high school students is they were willing to stand up, and they are hoping that somebody is finally listening. Their plea is enough is enough. Enough is enough. To the point that as we look at the youth of even our community, we have to ask, do they feel safe going to school? Even in Cedar Falls. And that we have to stop pretending that it's not going to happen here. But it's a dialogue that we need to ask, as these youth are asking the question, Do you love your AK-47s more than you love children? Us. My hope is that we will listen and learn. A week ago, on Valentine's Day, about 3 p.m, the fire alarm went off in the high school at Parkland, Florida. We're all trained. Whenever we hear a fire drill, we need to get out of that building as soon as possible. So teachers and students began piling out of the classrooms while Nicholas Cruz is standing there with an AK-47 ready to kill them innocently as they were entering that hallway. None of them were at any place where they could be defended. And yet I feel as though we have let our kids down. One of the 17 that was killed was a man by the name of Aaron Fees. Aaron was an assistant football coach as well as to be one of those security persons, to be there for kids. And as Nicholas Cruz was shooting away with his gun, Aaron threw himself and threw the kids out of the way and put himself between them, the children, and the shooter. He himself had taken so many bullets, but he was still alive when they found him and took him to the hospital where he died. He was one of the 17 who died. But he understood, as so many people came in and saying, this is what he is like, Aaron is like, is that he would always put others first before himself. And that's what it means in the sense of when we pick up our cross and follow Jesus, that we begin to put Jesus first and do what we can to live in this world to make a difference, even if it means losing our life. What good does it take to lose our life and gain nothing than to give our life and gain everything? I believe we let our children down. The stories that have come out recently have shared with us that there were students themselves who called in Nicholas Cruz to say that he is one with enough red flags that he would possibly truly come in and be a school shooter. But their pleas fell upon deaf ears. There was one security officer that stood outside, while at the same time there were children being killed. And now we're finding out that there might have been 3 more. No greater love. They will not be able to show their face anywhere. They basically have lost everything in saving their lives as opposed to giving their lives so that others might be saved. I do feel as though we have let our children down, and my prayer is that the discussion that they have brought up and the conversation is that enough is enough. As we look at Lent and as we focus upon the cross, Jesus said to us, pick up your cross and follow me. It is not an easy task to do. It is challenging at times, sometimes risky. It can be sometimes embarrassing, and yet we are called to be the light and the salt of this world. When Loretta began listening to the children and helping them learn to read, she wasn't counting the cost of what it meant to spend time and be with that. But what she is now is receiving the reward that when you give to others, you will receive. And as Jesus said, you will receive 10, 20, and sometimes 100-fold. You know, we've made it too simple and too easy for us to become Christians. We think just pouring a little water makes us Christians. But I believe that Jesus, in asking us to pick up our cross and follow him, is directing us to a faith that is deeper, a faith that trusts God, a faith that understands that it is faith that gets us through the challenges and the difficulties in life. It is faith that is going to make a difference in this world. And believe me, there's a lot to do. Let us pray. Gracious and holy God, we just thank you that in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, we have hope on this side of Easter. But for Peter, it must have been a very confusing time. But Jesus would talk about dying and death. And yet now we understand his death was for us so that we might live. Thank you, God. Thank you for the gift of Jesus, your Son. Amen.